Good afternoon, everyone. We are so delighted that you can join us today for our final Parent Education Series event of the 2021-2022 season. We are again just delighted to be offering an important topic again for our final event. Now what? Helping students prepare for college and beyond with Homayoun and Allia Griffin and Brandon Williams from Green Ivy Educational Consulting. All of you who are here with us today know what an important topic it is, and we elected to do this in June rather than August or September because there are hopefully going to be some tips and suggestions that will help you get your child ready for college. We are sponsored today by the Sequoia Union High School District, San Mateo Union High School District, Sequoia Healthcare District, and Peninsula Healthcare District, without whose sponsorship these events would not be possible. Again, we have attendees today from both Silicon Valley and across the nation and around the world. So we are very excited to have this become an international organization moving forward. Today's format is our three panelists are going to be speaking together on the topic, Now What? Helping students prepare for college and beyond. And we really want to engage with you, the audience. So there's two ways for you to interact with us. We have both the chat button. My co-founder, Bev Hartman, will be putting resource links. So do check out the chat, talk to one another, ask any logistical questions. But for questions about today, please do put them in the Q&A button. So questions in the Q&A, comments and resources in the chat, okay? Most of you who have attended one of our events are familiar with that, but we really do want to hear from you and hope that you will have some questions for our panelists. At the end, I will rejoin them and we'll have a Q&A period, so I'll be reading out those questions. Today's event is being recorded and will be available soon on our video library, which has become a valuable resource with more than 63,000 video views, including over 40,000 this year. So we're grateful to Anna and her panelists for letting us put this video today on the video library. At the very end of the event, Bev will post a survey link. We hope you will literally take 1 minute to fill that out. It helps with both planning for next year and information for our funders. We promise that we read everyone. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about today's featured presenters. Anna Hamoyan is the founder of Silicon Valley-based Green Ivy Educational Consulting, an educational consulting firm that helps students, parents, and educators with executive functioning skills, including organization, time management, and overall wellness. She is also the author of 3 acclaimed books, That Crumpled Paper Was Due Last Week, The Myth of the Perfect Girl, and most recently, Social Media Wellness. She is also the founder and executive director of Luminaria Learning Solutions, a nonprofit developing the Life Navigator School program that provides students with needed skills for economic mobility, as well as social and emotional wellness. Allia Griffin is an award-winning educator with over 10 years of experience teaching at the collegiate level. She currently teaches in the Department of Ethnic Studies at Santa Clara University. Brandon Williams is the Assistant Director of Academic and College Advising at Green Ivy Educational Consulting, where he regularly works with college students as an academic advisor. He is a graduate of Stanford University and holds an MA in counseling from the University of San Francisco. Please join us in a really warm virtual welcome for Anna and Brandon and Allia. All right, take it away, you three.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for that warm welcome. I wanted to thank you all for joining and also get right into our topic, because I know that we'll probably have a lot of questions that'll come up. And I think we all each offer a different area of expertise. So really quickly, thinking about who we are and our background, and Charlene gave a great welcome. I thought we could each offer a different perspective. Allia really offers a perspective of a college instructor and lecturer and professor that has seen what's happening in the classroom and has worked through it, teaching students online and then now seeing them return to the classroom. And Brandon is incredible at working with high school and college students. And so this past year has worked with a lot of college students that were going to college as either freshman or sophomore after being online for several years. So we've all seen that. So the format is we're going to offer our own perspectives, and then we welcome you to participate in the chat and the Q&A as well. So our roadmap is really, we're going to back up and talk about what we're seeing now. And then we're going to give 5 strategies for you as parents and caregivers to think about. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A, right? So our goal is that you know your child, you know the children in your life the best. So take what works for you and leave the rest. And we're going to work in and out of the slides. They're really just there as a visual support. Okay. So I thought Aaliyah could start us off with what she's been seeing at the college level, and then we'll work and then talk about some of the other pieces.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I have been teaching at Santa Clara for 9 years now, and before then taught at UCSD. Something that I have noticed is the way that the social dynamics on campus are spilling into the classroom space in ways that they didn't before the pandemic. And I'll explain a little bit about that. I think students are having trouble navigating making friends, finding spaces of belonging, and some of that is impacting their work in the classroom. So what I've done as a faculty member, and I'll speak from my own classroom experience specifically, is I've had to really change the way that I teach to accommodate what I'm seeing happen on campus. I have created a lot of ways for students to get to know each other in smaller groups. So before the pandemic, we would have gone to large group discussions, and my assumptions or expectations would have been that there would have been a participation in those large group discussions. Because students are moving more slowly in terms of meeting people and making friends and feeling comfortable with each other, I've switched my teaching so that there's more opportunities for small group involvement and community development and community building in the classroom. That's something that's new that's happened as students are transitioning back into being in person. Something else I've noticed that is happening across my campus is that faculty members are asked to remind students and discuss the importance of wellness and well-being in the classroom. And that was something that maybe we didn't talk about that much about in the classroom as much before the pandemic. So that we are, as faculty members, really trying to get students connected to the many resources so that it's not just about focusing on the content delivery of what's going on in our specific subject matter, but helping the students find places and resources across campus where they can be supported. And then finally, in my classroom, something that I've really transformed is the way that material is shared. Before the pandemic, my assumption would be that the majority of my students are always in class for most of the time. And that has shifted, obviously. And so I've had to find ways to share content with students in a virtual way so that every student can be successful and every student can access the material as well. So those are some of the shifts. I also have some recommendations as students are navigating the social scene and how they can navigate the ways that that has changed. One of them is for me to encourage students to get involved with activities, social activities and clubs early on. And that's a way to really make more friends. On our campus alone, there are cultural groups, there are religious organizations, there's service-oriented groups, academic groups, social justice groups, identity-based groups. There's so many clubs available for students to participate in. So something that I share with my students, even though it's not part of the content of my class, is encouraging them to get out there, encouraging them to connect with clubs across campus. Something else socially that I really encourage students to do is to eat their meals in community. Something that has happened with the pandemic is there's been a habit of eating alone in their rooms. And the cafeterias have allowed for students to just pick up their meals and take them to their rooms if they want. But I've really tried to encourage students to eat their meals in community because that's another way to meet people. And then finally, like another way to set up support in terms of academic support would be connecting with an professor like every week. If a student can make an attempt to go to an office hour every single week, that's something that a student can do to set up a structure of support early on in the quarter, early on in the semester. So those are some ways that I'm seeing shifts happening in the classroom and across campus, and trying to find ways to help students get adjusted and find a balanced social and academic life.
Thank you so much, Aaliyah. Brandon, I know that you've worked so much with advising students during the pandemic as I have, and I'm curious to see your perspective this last year as you've advised college students who are transferring to college.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here as well today. Yeah, in the last year, especially in working with students on both the high school and college level, I think some of the challenges and things that I've seen students face on an executive functioning level, pertains to how are they dealing with distractions? How are we helping students stay focused? Students now are returning to in-person instruction at college. And so having to build out their time during the week. When they were remote and online, they mostly had classes and didn't really have to schedule too many other things. But now that they're back in person, things are opening up again. There's classes, there's social events, extracurriculars, section, labs, all these other responsibilities now that students have to build in time for. And so I think I've worked with students closely on trying to help them map that out. Because I think a lot of students suddenly feel like they have a lot of free time. And as we may know, free time is not, should be used intentionally to get ahead, make sure that we're making progress. So we work with students on helping them think about their week in sort of a 40-hour work week. How are you building in your time daily to build in time for class, build in time for homework? I think that's a really big thing as well for students. How do you manage your time throughout the day around those classes, other responsibilities, and build in time for you to do work? And more importantly, where are you doing work? Probably if you're doing work in a crowded space, in a dormitory, in a common room area, there might be lots of distractions that a student might come across. But we can encourage students to go to libraries, other quiet places where they can focus and take a look at their portals, figure out what's going on for that week with all their classes, come up with a game plan. It can help them to stay on track. And I think those are a lot of things that we are seeing students facing now that they're coming back in person for instruction. So trying to help them think about that and visually, plan out their weeks.
So one of the things I want to help everybody understand too is that we've really had a year and a half or 18 months for your students that are going to college next year. For example, our graduating seniors, right? Much of their junior year might have been online and part of their sophomore year. Some of the key skills that we would think about around executive functioning. So inhibitory control. So that's how do you plan out things? How do you organize? How do you figure out what to do next? Some of that didn't develop in the same way because they didn't have the schedule that would have happened for maybe 12, maybe 18 months of the year. And then also there were different norms that happened. So now we're seeing students return to the classroom. And just like with adults, where things are just taking longer to get done, students are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of time we have to get dressed, we have to go up, think about you didn't have to wear shoes to go to class before, and you didn't have to think about, you could walk to your kitchen in the middle of class. So thinking about just the daily tasks that students have had to do, and what has been jarring for many of them is it was at a key time in development for them in terms of organizing, planning, prioritizing, thinking flexibly, and moving things into their day. So how can we help really students thrive in college? Like, this is what we really want to focus on today. And especially thinking about, we're in June now. Some of your students will be leaving in August, and some will be leaving in September. So we thought to think about these things in advance rather than adding them to one more thing as students are packing up and trying to get their computer and get their schedule. So that's why we wanted to present this information now. So the first thing we really wanted to think about is, how do we reflect and assess where students are today? With this this overlay of we've had a pandemic. We're living in a pandemic adjusted world, right? Even right now, things shift day to day, travel schedules, opportunities based on what's happening. So where I really think is a good place to think about in terms of your reflection and your assessment is three pieces. One is the executive functioning skills your students have, right? Are they able to organize, plan, prioritize, manage distractions? This all existed before the pandemic. Actually, this morning, I'm working on this book called Erasing the Finish Line, and I was rereading an interview with a student of mine from 2008. And what was so fascinating to me was that when she was in high school, she was incredibly busy. And suddenly she got to college and she had a lot of unstructured time, like Brandon talks about. And she really, the social piece was really important to her. Like for many students who have felt that some of their high school didn't have that social experience. So when she got to college, she spent, made decisions that prioritized social, which often meant she was out in the hall till 2 a.m., talking to people, not getting enough sleep, then trying to do work. And she really had a hard time managing her time. And that impacted her mental well-being, right? So one of the things we have to understand is, where are students coming from in this pandemic adjusted world? Where do they know how to study and learn, and when to compartmentalize their time? That's the first thing. And then second, with this concept of the 40-hour week that Brandon talked about, are they able to map out their work so that they have plenty of time to rest and to move and to be social? Because what ends up happening is that students end up procrastinating because they haven't built out skills proactively. So we try and show them, look, if you work between 9 and 6 every day, or 10 and 7, you don't have to be working late every weekend or late at night. And you shouldn't need to send an email to your professor at 1 a.m. or expect that you're going to get a reply. And that's kind of the thing that existed before and is now really amplified. So taking the time to assess that. The other piece is around social. How has your child been in the last few years around making new friends? For a lot of students, they haven't had a lot of great opportunities in person to do that. Maybe they have. And then also maintaining old friendships, because suddenly students are in a new place where being in person and socializing in person is how they're going to meet new people. And they may not have had as much practice as they would have had if they were in person in high school, or if they would have had summer activities. So when you think about this summer, what are things that they can put in place? And emotionally, we know so many adults and so many students are burnt out. So thinking about, what are the support systems that are in place here, and what do you feel like, does your student feel like they need to have in place at school? So one tip that I want to think about when you reflect and assess, and this is something you should do in collaboration with your child, and June is a great time to do it, is to list out all the tasks that maybe you remind them of, or you help them with, or you do for them, that when they go to college away, they are going to have to do themselves. And then have them identify 2 to 3 things that they will start doing now. And once they have that in place, maybe it's laundry, maybe it's making appointments, maybe once they do that, then move on to the next. Brandon, Aaliyah, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, definitely with the unstructured time, like those 3 big buckets, right? Movement, work, and rest. I think rest is the biggest thing, especially for students to build in time for, right? Not just necessarily sleeping, but time for self-care, time to decompress. And by structuring out their weeks, hopefully they will be able to have lots of opportunities for that.
I think that the piece on how long it takes us to do tasks that may seem sort of daily or mundane, is really important to remind the students of and to really be thinking about. Going to classes is draining for students in ways that it wasn't before. And so they need a lot of downtime to decompress and sort of restore themselves. And so planning that out in their day, I think, is really critical. I appreciated what you said about not emailing your professor at 1 a.m. Great reminder for everybody to have. Something that I've really been doing in my classroom and encouraging other faculty to do is before the pandemic, we would often have due dates for assignments that were turned online be midnight. So we would just say, turn it in by midnight. And amongst a group of faculty, we discussed that that wasn't really supplying our students with healthy habits and healthy practices. And instead, something that we've shifted to try to help assist students with thinking about this workday that's 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, perhaps, is that our due dates or the times for assignments will always be at 5 p.m. So that way we were really discouraging students from staying up late or from starting the assignment at 10 p.m. If it's due at 5 p.m., that it feels like a more normative time for things to be due. So I think that that's a big piece of it. As I'm thinking about the reflection and assessment that you can do with your child, taking the time to really look at what resources are provided on campus before they even step foot on campus, I think would be really great, so that your students aware of, like, where's the health center? Where's the gym that you're going to go to? Where's the place where you're going to do your laundry? Things like that. So a student can map out the spaces and places that will be supportive for them before they even step foot on campus.
That's great. And when we think about what you can do now, it's almost like, can you be an explorer in this moment about what exists already? And again, one thing to think about in high school for students, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that had these like very packed schedules, and I'm sure there were parent presentations on overscheduled students. They had to be in school 8 hours a day. So this transition to, you may have 2 classes a day and then 1 class on Tuesday, but you need to get up and go and do things so that you haven't taken the whole day and done nothing and felt drained, and then try and start your work. The second thing I think that we can really talk about, both from personal perspective and seeing students in this moment of social media, my last book was called Social Media Wellness, is this identifying the cadence of communication. And what we mean by that is, how often are your kids going to call you, right? Or be in contact? And we have this focus on instantaneous, all the time communication. Aaliyah and I have spoken about this before, where, you know, she had to manage the expectation to students that she's not available 24/7 to answer a question. And we hear this all the time. Like, sometimes people will say, you know, send us an email, and if they don't hear back in 24 hours, they're like, wait, where are you? And it's on the weekend, right? So collaborating with your child on cadence of communication is really about thinking about focusing on your child's safety and well-being, and adjusting to what communication looks like. Because as they're trying to be in this new space and meet new people, it's going to be really hard if they're constantly in nonstop communication with people at home. And again, everything works differently for different students. So things that I've seen work really well for some families, again, you know, each child is different, each mode of communication is different, but using text or memes, or like you just send a meme for the day, or an alternative way. Some parents have gotten on Snapchat and they send each other a snap for the day. Maybe they talk on the phone at a different point. But thinking about, as they go to school, before they're there, what does cadence of communication look like? And what do you feel like is important for safety and well-being? For some students, when they go to school, no news could be good news, right? They're making friends, they're well-adjusted, they're eating in the dining hall, they're busy with their classes and their activities. For other students, it could be the opposite. So figuring out who are their touch points, it might not be you, that they are reaching out to regularly or are in contact with them. And then really thinking about this summer, especially, how are we beyond the safety and well-being, right? So there's a safety and well-being piece, but how are we mindful of our own as adults addiction with instantaneous response and contact? So we get really nervous if we don't hear back right away. When the stories that we tell ourselves, I've had so many high school students say to me, I want to be off my phone and turn it off like you tell me when I'm trying to do my work. But if I don't respond to my parent right away, they freak out. So thinking about what does that look like as we send students off, and what is that promotion of communication in a space of safety and well-being look like? Aaliyah, Brandon, anything to add?
I think this is all really great. I think maybe setting up, like having this conversation around, what is communication going to look like, I think is really, really important. I am also a mother. And so I'm feeling like some of this is speaking to me. So I'm really hearing some of it too, as the mother of a young child who I can, really connect to what you're saying here about our desire to really be able to contact them continuously, but the need to give them the space for them to really kind of be independent is critical as well.
So it could be like, for some families, it could be a weekly call that's an actual call and then daily texts. So I know one of our students this year that was a sophomore in college, Sunday afternoon was an actual time where they did a longer FaceTime call that was more of a debrief for the week. And that could have been a half an hour or so, versus they might have had just a quick check-in time, or like a text, or like, hey, good morning, thinking of you, that kind of thing. But thinking about what the cadence is, so it's allowing them to develop and also feel safe and supported and a sense of belonging. Brandon, I know you have some opinions on this, because your own cadence of communication is, you have some stuff to think about.
Yeah, no, definitely. When I was going to college, I remember hearing different things from my parents. My mom was sort of okay with like every other day, sort of keeping in touch. My dad is sort of expected like contact every day or like a call every day. And when I got to undergrad, I think it was just navigating, what's on my plate, when can I build in time, and trying to be realistic with them. Like I may not be able to have a phone call every day, but setting those boundaries, setting those expectations together, I think can lead to healthy communication, which is the most important thing.
So Aaliyah brought this up earlier, and she did such a great job of thinking about this, but having students identify sources of support now, rather than waiting till when they are on campus. The number one thing we see with students in our office is often one of our exercises that we do with students early on is, what exists and what is free and available to you as part of your tuition, as part of your thing. There could be writing support, there could be mental health services, there could be academic tutoring. And more we get students come overwhelmed and they're like, oh, I didn't know that existed. Or they wait to sign up and it's full, right? So, what my experience, and I still think this is so relevant, is that there were a lot of students that knew that you had to sign up in September for the tutoring that was free for the science courses. And there were certain tutors that you asked for, right? And in the university department. And so by the time I got 6 weeks into my science course, when I was like, I really need help, I'm buried, I went and nobody was available, right? And so identifying what exists at the college from an academic, from a mental health, from a movement like exercise. One of the things Aaliyah and I were talking about a couple of weeks ago is a lot of students are going to college having played high school sports or participated in an activity that gave them structure and routine and exercise and movement for their mental well-being. And then they suddenly go to college, and if they don't establish a routine, they're not moving in the same way. And it might be even harder because suddenly they went to practice at 4:30 and all they had to do was show up. Now they have to go to the gym and figure out what they want to do, or join a running club, or, what are the things that they are going to do to build in some form of movement and mindfulness every day, whatever that is. Is it writing in a journal? Is it doing the Calm app? Is it using Headspace? What are their things? Is there a youth or spiritual group that's important to them? thinking about what's available. And then finally, the career and internship exploration. A lot of students think freshman year is too early. And then you have a lot of freshmen who feel like they have to do everything at once. So nothing has to happen. Not everything has to happen in the first semester, but looking at what exists. There are so many great programs on campuses that go underutilized or unused because students just don't know about them. So before these students get to campus this summer, where they're kind of excited about it, is the time to do this deep dive. The caveat to that is, a lot of times right now, academic centers are under-resourced. They're just, like many things, understaffed. There's a lot of need. So it may be that on campus doesn't have the amount of resources that your student might need. And it may be that you have to outsource to other things. So any examples or thoughts, Aaliyah, Brandon, around this, or examples that you've seen in your own work with students?
Yeah, one of the things I want to emphasize is that if your student is going to school in August, they'll be on the semester. So they'll have a longer time with their courses, like their courses will be closer to 18 weeks. If they're going to school in September, they're on the quarter system, which means that each quarter is only 10 weeks. So I say that to say that it's critical that the students connect with sources of support early on, before there's an issue, before there's a missed assignment, or before there's a question, or before there's a test coming up. The quarter system is wonderful for a lot of reasons, but it moves incredibly fast. And so waiting to go to office hours with a faculty member until like there is a problem puts a student in like a difficult position. So really encouraging students to go to office hours with their faculty members just to introduce themselves, just to connect early on, I think will be really great to emphasize. Something else that Anna mentioned was starting in your first year to be thinking about career and internship explorations. One opportunity for that always is research with faculty members. First, I have first year students who work as research assistants with me. If they've taken one course and they're interested in it and they express their interest, there's endless opportunities to do research with faculty. You just have to ask. And so connecting with faculty members can be a really great way to support a student to have this sort of structure set in place. The other piece too about finding ways to just get physically involved through it's like, joining club soccer or joining a running club, or there's lots of hiking clubs, especially I obviously teach at a local institution where hiking would be something that a lot of people do. There's lots of opportunities for that. And it's so important for their mental well-being to be exercising.
Yeah, and to add on to what's already been shared, I think a lot of schools will typically, as students are arriving to campus, do presentations, let them know about a lot of these resources, but knowing where they physically are on campus is something else. And so encouraging students during that first week, to definitely map out where those things are. One of the centers that I felt was underutilized was the writing center. So students can come in and get support on writing on any part of the process, whether it's brainstorming, outlining, or if you have a draft, getting edits done. And so, really breaking down those sort of myths that like you need to have things prepared or come in with something ready to go. There's lots of resources on campus where you can come in and explore together, like what is it that might be confusing. And I think it's important as well for students to identify different adults on campus that might be resources for them. Whether it's a faculty who they've taken a class with, faculty that might be attached to their dorm, there might be some relationship there, at least there was for me in undergrad. Again, other communities, if they do sports, extracurriculars, what are other places where they might be able to find these adults who can also act as these support systems?
I think one of the things that is really important to recognize as we move forward too, is there's 3 places where in our office, we've seen sort of a gap in knowledge from an academic standpoint that may tie into college. One is writing. So some of our students, even our most diligent students, they may have had 12 to 18 months where they had a reduced course load of writing assignments. Maybe it was they just didn't have as many, or they just didn't get as much practice. You know, a lot was going on for instructors as well in high school. So we're seeing these students, you know, I was just working with this high school senior where I was, you know, very diligent student, but I was looking at her capabilities versus what was going to be required next year to college. And there's a big gap, right? So understanding that as well. The other place is math. A lot of times learning math online was really tricky for students. And so there's fundamentals that are missing. So from that perspective, I would also say, you know, going back, and if students go to college, not to take the next level of math necessarily, and maybe retake something so that they feel more familiar. That's consistent with what I hear from students that are in college. Like, I made the mistake to take the next level, and maybe it would have been safer for me, but also a good review because, you know, there were gaps based on, you know, if we thought about March 2020 and what didn't get covered that spring in a lot of schools. And then the last is world languages. And so, you know, again, students going to college, there's often a requirement for a world language. Sometimes there is a gap, and this is another place where sometimes students say, let me just take the next level. So thinking about what their course schedule looks like and what makes the most sense to keep them engaged and challenged, but not overwhelmed, knowing that you may have had 12 to 18 months of pandemic adjusted schooling. So the next thing is, you know, we're going to move into the last 2 points before the Q&A, but really encouraging shared experiences with people from different backgrounds. And, you know, if you've heard me speak before, one of the things we talk about is multiple sources of connection. So in our office this year, I have said this on my newsletter, but we have gotten more requests for students wanting to transfer. So they'll call our office. They didn't maybe work with us before, but they're saying, my student wants to transfer. And every single time when I talk to parents and then students, when I talk directly to them, I ask them, did something happen socially? And 100% of the time, the reason for wanting to transfer is social and not academic. That's not a scientific study. It's just an anecdotal thing of what I've seen over the last year. And part of it is what Aaliyah mentioned earlier, harder to make friends. Our sort of our muscle around entering a room where we might not know each other or know anyone is not been practiced or used. But also it's that friendships are developed over time together and by having shared experiences. So our goal to think about for students is that they have multiple connections and groups of connections, both on campus and off. Because one of the pieces to think about is your friends from the first 2 weeks. And Brandon and I have talked about this because when Brandon went to school, he did this program, the pre-orientation, which I highly recommend thinking about for students, is like a pre-orientation program around a shared interest or maybe something that stretches you out of the comfort zone. But that doesn't mean they have to be your friends for 4 years or even the first quarter or semester. It's about having multiple experiences with different people and being open to that. And I think a lot of times, given that students haven't been fluid in different friend circles and the normal things that would have happened in a high school social experience, we aren't seeing the conflict management resolution skills that students know. And so if one group doesn't work out, they feel, oh my God, I have to leave campus. And I saw that more than once this year. Whereas instead of being an adaptable thinker, okay, well, that's, you know, those people, it's just not going to work, you know, and here are some other people that I'm going to engage with. I see Aaliyah and Brandon nodding, and I'd love to hear your stories or thoughts on that.
Yeah, to follow up on the pre-orientation trip. Yeah, I was moving to a new college, new town. I didn't really have family or know many people. So it was a bit of a transition period for me. But that was a first opportunity to meet folks who were also attending and to connect with them over this shared interest. We did a trip on social justice and was then moved into my dorm and was able to meet lots of people in my dorm. And that became, you know, a different community for me. And over time, you know, the extracurriculars I did with the public service center or club sports. Those were different places where I was meeting new people and forming these different communities. And so encouraging students to, really have an open mind, and yeah, try to make new friends, enter new spaces, try new things, learn new skills. Those are all beneficial in helping you find those communities.
Yeah, I was going to say as well that that's something that I've witnessed this past academic year, of just students struggling with navigating social dynamics with friend groups and feeling in the same way that Anna mentioned about then feeling like this need to give up. And I think to connect to what Brandon was saying about just trying to get out there and just really, trying new experiences and how critical that is. Something that a parent could do with their student before they leave is to really talk about, well, what would your first semester or your first quarter look like if it went really well? And you can hear what their goals are around making new friends. And you can talk through, okay, like what would you need to do to make that happen, right? Like what would you have to do? And so you could talk through and visualize the types of actions that students would have to take, whether it's joining a club sport, or I really loved, Brandon, the example that you gave about a service-oriented group as well, like a philanthropic group. I think that's a really great way to find people with shared interests. And I think it connects as well to one of our first questions from Julia, which is, how can we help our student handle peer pressure to do things they may not want to do, i.e. like drinking? Along those lines, I think finding social organizations that are around positive experiences can be really wonderful. So if you're part of a service organization that volunteers, they might have a Friday activity for students to participate in where it's centered around a healthy, positive experience, and it gives the student a community that has, I think, shared values.
One of the things I saw when I was doing the research years ago for Myth of the Perfect Girl was that students consistently would tell me they didn't want to do X, Y, and Z, but thought that was the only way to socialize. And I think since then, campuses have become really good about creating multiple spaces and avenues to socialize that weren't just around a Friday or Saturday night social event that involved drinking or some other activity. What the pandemic adjusted that for, though, is that a lot of those spaces closed, and they may be reopening now on campus, and they may be adjusted in different ways. But thinking about with your student, what are the ways that you can do? And I actually gamify it with students that are younger, and I think this works with college students too, is can you introduce yourself to 2 or 3 people every week? Now, you don't have to be friends with them, best friends with them. It doesn't have to be a lifelong experience, but just making skills for small talk. We talk about that with the Life Navigator. It's actually one of our lessons because we realize that students don't know how to do small talk, and it's hard for adults too. But if you don't have that practice, another thing to think about this summer, is there a job where they're working with the general public where they have to make small talk? Maybe it's as a barista, maybe it's as a hostess at a restaurant. You have these interactions that seem very small, but actually they can help build those skills as students are in a new space meeting new people. And then finally, this one is for parents and caregivers that are on the call and everybody who cares about students, is to join the parent groups. There might be parent groups that are online, right? Facebook groups. And then there also may be things in person, depending on where your child goes to school. There may be regional alumni events. They always welcome parents often. I won't say always, but many of the ones I know of welcome parents. And think about what are the ways that you can get engaged and excited, even if you didn't go to school there, for example, but it also gives you a shared conversation piece with your child, right? Maintaining that cadence of communication. So there's regional events sometimes. There's, I always say though, every time, and we have to say this to kids, but we say this to adults too, is understand that people may interact differently online. So if you get something in the parent group, I know that sometimes things go wild in parent groups. So you got to figure out what's important and what's not, but it can give you a pulse on the community and parents of older students that may be able to answer questions or give their own perspective as things go on, like study abroad, for the career center, all of those things that parents might be able to offer guidance and community. So as you're navigating that. So we've covered a lot. And I know that that there are good questions. And so I want to bring Charlene back up. There she is, to help us navigate those questions.
Wow. Well, thank you, Anna and Aaliyah and Brandon. What a great set of information that was. As the parent of two young adults who have attended university, grad school, law school, I can tell you that this is really sound, really important advice, especially around, as you talked about, the cadence of communication. What a great phrase that is. And seeking out support in advance. Students, if you are starting at as Aaliyah said, if you are on the quarter system and you go and you get involved in dorm stuff and it's 3 weeks in before you've opened a book, you're in trouble, as Brandon well knows. So this is something to consider. And also, as I said, set up your family communication expectations in advance so people are not hurt or stressed by that. Brandon, it must have been hard having to answer texts every day. For some kids, that's great. For some kids, it's too much. All right, we have wonderful questions, as Anna said, coming in from you, the audience. So let's get started on a few of them. Here's one. How can we help our son or daughter when one of their friends is in trouble and our child wants to help support and guide them through the difficulties? This is often an issue for students in high school that continues in college. How can we help our son or daughter when one of their friends is in trouble and needs help?
Well, I think one of the most important things to help people understand is that old adage of putting your own, oxygen mask on first to take care of yourself, because sometimes students in college are going to be experiencing things that any good friend is well-meaning, but just unequipped to help with. And it may be that your job as a friend is to connect with resources and say, hey, I want to be supportive. I think the best way I can be supportive is to connect you with the right people to help you. And maybe that means walking them with them to the counseling center. Maybe that means, whatever that means. And then that also that child, your child, to make sure that you're in contact with them so that they aren't feeling overwhelmed or drowned in somebody else's challenge. Because again, when you're away from home, you're already navigating a whole bunch of things and it can feel lonely. So you're going to seek out support immediately where you are. And if you're in a dorm, you're going to seek it out with the people in your dorm. But making sure, especially right now, that students know you may not be the person, but your support can be, I'm going to help you find the right person. Aaliyah, Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah, I think especially, identifying again those adults or those resources on campus. Sort of, in high schools, I know there's a lot of programs, if you see something, say something. And I feel like that translates well to college as well, and ultimately we want to ensure everyone's safety. So encouraging students to identify who are those adults, who do you go to for, different concerns, and helping, making sure that they can help their friends get to those places.
Yeah, well said, Brandon. I think that there's a lot of adults on campus too who are experts who can really step in and help. And I think as a faculty member, that's what I see my role as, is connecting the student to the resource that they need. And I think as a friend or as a parent of a friend, that might be something that can be encouraged. I appreciated what Anna said too about, making sure that one is taking care of themselves first and aware of like what they can do that won't become a burden or won't become difficult for themselves.
All right, thank you all. Great advice. So here's a question that I know is on many parents' minds and affects a lot of students, particularly today during the pandemic. Parent says, our student has anxiety and they're very concerned about being able to adjust to college life. What is the best way to support a student with anxiety?
There's a multifaceted approach to that question. I think one of the pieces that people underestimate is the role of executive functioning skills and having that time structure and support. So identifying the sources of support on campus, but also off campus. So if your child has anxiety and was seeing a therapist in your community and that was a helpful source of support, it doesn't mean that that may be something that continues over Zoom, and that might be helpful. That's one example. The other is really thinking about what are the biggest triggers, helping your child identify what the biggest triggers are for their anxiety, and what are the behavioral things that they can reach out to. So if you're having a really anxious moment or an anxious afternoon, what are the resources, or what's their emotional toolbox, is a term we use in the office. What are the 5 things that help them address their anxiety? Whether it's, for some people it's listening to music, for some people it's sleep, for some people it's, taking a walk. What are some things that they can put in place daily, but then when they need to take a break? And so helping students build their emotional toolkit while they're home is important, and making sure that once they're on campus, they have places and spaces that can help them navigate those, build in those behavioral techniques that are helpful for them.
Thank you very much, Anna. Really great answer. And as you have all said today, find out in advance what the sources of support are. All colleges have augmented their mental health offerings in the last 3 years. So there's certainly places to go, but it would help to know about those things, I think, before your student got there, particularly if they've been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder or suffer from some degree of anxiety, which most of us do, especially recently. So here's another great question. Love this one. And do you have any advice for student athletes regarding balancing work, social, personal care, or top of demand like sports, especially for D1 athletes?
Brandon, I know you've worked with a number of D1 athletes this year, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So one of the things that with the student, we primarily were working around their schedule. They had practices in the early mornings, I think some weight training in the afternoon, games on weekends, all of those things. And so going back to that idea of the 40-hour work week, I think it really, applies for student athletes as well, and really planning, okay, when are your classes, when your practices, let's get those things scheduled out. And then we can really see where your time, what time you have left then to do work, and where we can find those gaps in your schedule. Because I think, students will say, oh, I have morning practice, and then I have classes, then I have weightlifting. There's not a lot of time in my day to do work. But when we'll look at the schedule, we'll see, oh, actually there's an hour here, an hour and a half. You can definitely work on something here. That way we aren't waiting till the end of the day to work on assignments. So definitely helping students plan out when their practices, other responsibilities are, and then, working with them on identifying those tasks, assignments for the week, and when they can do that around those things.
And most athletes care, any athlete will tell you the 2 things they care about most are sleep and nutrition in terms of preventing injury. So the way we get student buy-in in general is that, especially for athletes, is that they want to get enough sleep because it affects their performance, which can affect playing time and all of these things. And if you're a D1 college athlete, you've really worked hard to get there. And so thinking about what are the habits that they have to put in place. Many athletes will have options at their college too. Increased academic advising, structured support. They can choose classes first. So really taking advantage of understanding that extra layer of support that their athletic department might offer.
Yeah. And I think that this advice is helpful for student athletes, but it's really helpful for all students, which is communicating with their faculty member very early on. So student athletes often will send me an email within the first week and say, hi, I'm part of the soccer team. I'm going to miss these 3 days during the course of the quarter. I'm going to connect with you during office hours, but I just wanted to let you know in advance. It's a great exercise in communication for all students to just share if there are things going on.
Aaliyah, that brings me back to a point that you made earlier. And yes, athletes do have to have an added layer of organization to their day and week. But you mentioned that parents can support students in understanding how to communicate with their professors. So emailing at 1 a.m. and expecting an answer at 2 a.m., not a good idea. Can you give us a couple of pointers for how students should communicate with professors? And for example, should they start early on using those visiting hours? I remember when my students started college and they said, you know, it turns out we just sit here. We actually like students. We would like it if you would come visit us. What do you say today?
Something I've actually suggested to my colleagues is that we rename office hours student hours so that it's very student-centered, so they know that we want them to be there, we want them to be with us. I would say even practicing an email format of how do I email my professor, making sure you have a salutation, dear professor, right? How do I write an email? If you have just a template that you can share with your student, and it goes such a long way. Little things like that. Remembering that although university life is 24/7, the classroom life is really set within work hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 or 9 to 5. And so sending emails like those in advance, just having conversations like that, really encouraging your student and having conversations. Have you met with your faculty member? What are your professors like? Who have you talked to? Asking those types of questions might encourage a student to feel more comfortable to approach their faculty member.
Oh, really good advice, Aaliyah. And I know also my students were fortunately outgoing, but they really did get to know their professors and parents. In the long run, that matters. If your student is trying to get into a class or they might have missed an assignment, if they have a personal relationship, it is much more helpful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, Anna, yes? I love that idea of teaching an email template. I love that.
Well, I will say most kids, that's what we don't realize from 10 years ago to now, is that their text messaging has made email so transactional that communication skills have really gone out, the window. And so, yeah, that's a piece that we see a lot.
Great advice. Okay, here's a question that I know a lot of parents will relate to. My child knows what she should be doing, for example, time management tools. She just chooses not to. Those are her words, not mine. Any tips on how to get her to take action?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to the work that we do in our office, because people always ask me, and have asked me in my books, like, how do you get kids to be excited about this work around organizing, planning, prioritizing, managing distractions, thinking flexibly? And it really comes down to making it about them. There's two pieces. One, we make it about them. It's not about me. It's not about their parents. It's not about, and understanding that it happens at a different time for different students. But getting their buy-in is about what interests them and how can they have more time or energy to explore. The problem with the pandemic and our pandemic adjusted world is that everybody had a lot of time. So when you have a lot of time, there can be this lack of motivation. So thinking about what are the things that they want, right? What gets them the buy-in? And also, what are the things that they want to move towards? So one of the ways, the tips for independence is, if there's something that they want, what are they doing to earn it, right? Do they have a job? I think the best way is also thinking that the parent doesn't have to help these students necessarily develop the independent skills. It's helping them figure out, okay, you have to get a job if you want to pay for X. And thinking about, what does that job entail, where you have to work maybe with the public. I always think retail and food service are great examples of places where students, especially right now, again, that public communication, this talking, and a lot of times students are going to build these skills without even thinking about it, and you're not reminding them that they have to. And I know we're out of time, but I think I'll look at the questions, by the way, and I will make sure that on our next newsletter that we try and answer some of them. So for those that are interested, feel free to head to our website, and I'll give it now, and you can just add yourself to our newsletter, and we will go through and answer some more of those. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, everyone. This hour has gone by so quickly. I wish we could have answered every questions, but Anna, thank you for addressing those in your newsletter. And we have 1 minute for some very quick parting words. Anybody? Brandon, I'm going to start with you. Any one piece of advice you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think the big thing, again, I'll repeat, is encouraging students to have an open mind. There's no one right way to do the college experience. Try new things, take different classes. That's always my biggest piece, because I went in thinking I wanted to study one thing and ended up coming out something completely different. But it was only through trial and error and exposure that I was able to do that. So definitely encouraging students to have an open mind.
That is a great piece of advice. Aaliyah, how about you?
Well, I just want to wish everyone well. And this is such an exciting time in a student's life. And so having all this support and excitement and energy is really wonderful. And wishing everybody all the best. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And again, lovely comments in the chat. Anna, thank you so much for your generosity to the Parent Venture and for assembling this amazing panel. Any final words?
I just want to make sure families and students don't think that they have to do everything in the first quarter or semester. It is this opportunity to explore, but don't feel like if you didn't solve all the problems or all the things or make all the friends, that's okay. That things take time, and to give yourself time and grace to do those. So thank you, Charlene and Bev and the Parent Venture. You all do such amazing work. And we are so grateful for this resource. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Anna and Aaliyah and Brandon. This was a wonderful hour. Again, parents and counselors on with us today, thank you for joining. This event will be available soon on our video library, and all of you who registered will receive it. Take care, everybody, and have a great summer. It has been a wonderful season. What a wonderful way to end it. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.